Otaze, says the tailor, as he fashions pretty clothes. Otaze, says the tailor, as he sews
Here
and
in New
sews and
York,
sews.
in the heart of Manhattan, ended our journey in quest of an extraordinary venture. The meteoric rise, fall and begin of the revival of the Yiddish theater and the story of the life of its founder, Avram Goldfaden.
Otaze, says the tailor, as he sews and sews and sews. My love for Goldfaden comes from when I was a little child. I would grow up. My grandfather, who was a amateur singer, would sing Goldfaden all the time, here in the Bronx, in New York. And my mother, who is a well-known archivist and musicologist, has published several books on Yiddish song, also knew the music of Goldfaden, and I would hear it as a kid. So growing up, she was a pianist, so growing up I would hear it all the time. And the melodies of Goldfaden are so powerful that they remained with me for a long time.
As part of a revival of Yiddish, not just the language, but if you want to understand Yiddish culture, Goldfaden is so important to that culture. I'm not going to say he's important to the 17th century culture, but important for the last 200 years, that you have to listen to the songs, learn the songs, in order to understand much of the culture.
Goldfaden, somehow, he was there when it erupted. There was a spot where it could explode out, it's like a children's balloon. You know, you blow and you blow and you blow, and suddenly, wham!
אני ממש מרגיש שזה רגע היסטורי, גם בתור שחקן שחוזר למקום איפה שהייתה קהילה יהודית מאוד גדולה, ותרבות יהודית מאוד גדולה, וגולדפאדן ייסד פה את התיאטרון האידי למעשה, ואני חוזר מלהקה ישראלית, מישראל, ממדינת היהודים, חוזר למקום הזה ולשחק דווקא פה מחזה יהודי קלאסי. אני חושב שזו הזדמנות גדולה, ואני ממש התרגשתי אתמול על הבמה מעצם העניין הזה.
De 2 ani se întâmplă un miracol la Iași. Iașiul revine pentru o săptămână, la sfârșitul fiecărui octombrie, revine la sursele teatrului evreiesc, care s-au întâmplat aici, la Iași, în urmă cu foarte mulți ani, la 1876 s-au pus bazele primului teatru evreiesc din lume. Vine lumea la Iași și lumea primește Iașul pentru o săptămână, în fiecare an. Din toată lumea vin trupe, vin oameni de teatru, public de teatru, oameni calificați, oameni care vor să vadă teatru, nu numai teatru evreiesc pur și simplu, dar și teatru de temă evreiască, teatru idiș. Și cred că acest eveniment teatral unic în partea asta de lume, cel puțin, așa mi se spune, reprezintă una din mărcile specifice ale unei capitale culturale cum este Iașul. Fiecare zi de festival a fost gândit de la început plecând de dimineață de la workshop-uri și de la alte manifestări de muzică, de pictură, de artă plastică în general, trecând prin teatrul în spațiu neconvențional și sfârșind în fiecare seară. Pivotul zilei este totdeauna, și al serii desigur, este un spectacol în limba idiș, pentru că interesul principal al acestui festival internațional de teatru de la Iași constă în faptul că aici se adună oamenii care țin la moștenirea culturii idiș în această lume.
Teatrul idiș există în România pentru că de el au nevoie nu numai evreii din România, ci spectatorii neevrei și lumea evreiască din diasporă și toată evreimea din lume. Am fost întrebat cât timp va mai exista idișul și teatrul idiș. Atâta timp cât vor fi doi evrei în diasporă, unul în Argentina și unul în România.
Mi se pare că ceea ce se întâmplă aici este un exemplu de cum oamenii pot trăi împreună și arta, teatrul și în situația noastră limba idiș pot uni oameni sub același acoperiș care să dea publicului, să dea inimii spectatorului ceva din căldura internă sufletească.
Certainly I have a personal reaction to being here because it's a mythic place.
The thriving Yiddish community, the cradle of the Yiddish theatre, is now no more than a sea of names etched in the stones of the local cemetery, silent witness to happy and tragic events. Here lie the shiny Eden who once filled the many synagogues and wine cellars, from which Goldfaden recruited his singer-actor and formed the public which flocked and filled the rough benches of the now historic Pomul Verde, the Green Tree, his first theatre. They lie together with their rabbis and their Hasidim, the Melandim and Talmidim, all friends and drinking companions of Itzik Manga and Eleazar Steinberg.
În a doua jumătate a secolului XIX, Iașul era un oraș mic, număra 70.000 de locuitori. Mai bine din jumătate din populația Iașului în acel timp era de origine evreiască, apoi armene și apoi această breaslă străinilor sau sudiților, li se spunea lor așa, care aduna celelalte minorități din oraș. Orașul se întindea de la Podul Roș până la fundație, concentrându-se pe această direcție, chiar de la Podul Roș, pe lângă fosta curte domnească, actualul Palat al Culturii, trecând pe lângă Teatrul Național, pe Bulevardul cel Mare și Sfânt, până la fundație, aduna toată această populație de 70.000 de suflete. Pe circa 200 de metri, nu mai mult, exista prima filarmonică a Iașului, anume Casa Boierului Balș, unde se dădeau concerte, la 1842 a concertat Liszt acolo, alături la 50 de metri clădirea Teatrului Național și încă la 50 de metri grădina Pomul Verde, cu primul teatru evreiesc din lume. Aceasta era zona centrală a Iașului, concentrată cultural. Nu sunt documente în acest sens, dar există totuși niște înscrisuri care spun că prima breaslă acceptată de domnitorul Ilașvodă ar fi fost la 1600 și ceva breaslă de evrei.
The Jewish communities in Moldavia are very numerous. One can say that there is no small city in Moldavia without Jews. They have the right to live all over the country, engaging in different trades and professions, and free to worship their religion without any restriction. Iași, the town itself, is a monstrous mishmash of massive elegant buildings and palaces, alongside shabby shacks with thatched roofs surrounded by endless courtyards. The latest Parisian and Viennese fashion against Moldavian old-fashioned tattered and shabby clothing, all fitting rather a masked ball. Standing at an open window, an observer with an eye to multicultural exhibits could in half an hour get acquainted with 10 different nations and travel in his mind to France, Germany and the Far East. During the Tsar's time, the Jews in Russia were allowed to live only in special enclaves, as far as possible from the big cities. These enclaves formed together the so-called Pale of Settlements. In one of those was born the hero of our journey.
Goldfaden is born to a traditional Jewish family in Stary Constantine. His father is a clockmaker, actually. He decides to learn the trade as well, with the plan that he might actually move down to Romania, ironically enough, if he was drafted into the army. By the time he becomes school age, there's a new law that's passed in Russia that allows any Jew who goes to a Russian-sponsored school not to go to the army. And so that's what Goldfaden does.
The way he approached his material was as a maskil. A maskil was someone who wanted to educate the folk masses. They shouldn't be stuck in the Middle Ages, in their opinion, but they should become enlightened. That's what haskala means, enlightenment.
Goldfaden comes out exactly from this movement, the movement of the haskala. He wanted to reach the people, and especially he started to write as a protest, as a reaction to the religious restriction.
When he's probably 17 or 18, he goes to a Russian Jewish seminary. He has great gift for language, a great gift for actually the Jewish sources. He knows probably books of the Torah off by heart. He was supposedly quite accomplished that way. He goes to Zhitomir, where one of the two seminaries are located, and he really thrives there, actually. He meets a teacher of his who was actually from his hometown named Avraam Goldfaden. And Goldfaden himself was writing Yiddish and Hebrew plays and songs. And Avram is greatly influenced by Goldfaden and begins to write himself.
Nothing comes out of a vacuum. There were people writing plays before Goldfaden, but they weren't performed. Only on the holiday of Purim, you have the Purim Spielers who performed theater. Starting in the 19th century, people started to write plays, but there was, the rabbis wouldn't let them perform them. In Goldfaden's case, when he studied at the Zhitomir seminary, and there they put on a play that I think one of the teachers wrote, Ettinger. Goldfaden played the lead.
I think it must have inspired Goldfaden to write his own plays, and he did that, and he published them, but they were never really performed, certainly not publicly, because of the prohibition against Yiddish theater in Russia. In Romania, there was, of course, no prohibition, so that was one of the aspects of Romania that allowed the Yiddish theater to take root.
Se juca teatru mult la Iași. În casele boierești se juca teatru. Atunci nu era această superbă clădire inaugurată la 1896. Era o zonă care polariza din punct de vedere cultural. Era un public calificat și pentru teatru, și pentru literatură, pentru seratele respective și faptul că se juca teatru, că de aici pleca mișcarea teatrală, că trupele din sud, cele ale lui Caragiale, de exemplu, făceau turnee la Botoșani, la Iași. Ne spune destule despre asta.
In 1876, Goldfaden was in Romania coincidentally. He was somewhat of a wanderer by this time. He had started up a few newspapers that didn't work out so well, a few businesses that also collapsed. But he was a very popular songwriter by this time, and he had published some plays that were read privately or performed privately. So he had somewhat of a following.
There's this wonderful scene in someone's memoirs where they witnessed Goldfaden in a bar, in a tavern in Czernowitz in the 1880s, I think, together with another great singer, Velvel Zbarger, who was from Eastern Galicia but lived a lot in Romania. And the two of them, today we would call it rap music, but they improvised rhyme about each other, and it's one of the most brilliant scenes. They loved each other, but they were trying to outdo each other, a contest, who could rhyme the best, improvising on the spot.
One of his admirers was a man named Isaac Libresco. Isaac Libresco was a Romanian Jew. He was part of this growing Jewish bourgeoisie, and that's why he changed his name. It was Liber, which is more of a Jewish name, to Libresco, something more Romanian sounding. And of course, he would also modernize his clothing, and he started a lodge or a fraternity of other Jews like himself, and they would discuss the politics of the day. They would try to help improve the lot of the poor Romanian Jews. Most of Romanian Jews were poor. they also tried to cultivate Jewish creativity. And so he invited Goldfaden down to Romania to speak to his lodge. And Goldfaden was there.
People in Iași, in that part of Eastern Europe, by then were not so much under the eye of the Rebbe. There was more room for being westernized, for going out and drinking wine and eating at a cafe that wasn't kosher.
The Jews in Iași were workers, they were artisans, they were small tradesmen, they were tailors, they were small shopkeepers, they were cobblers, they were tinsmiths, people who worked with their hands. There was a Jewish proletarian in Iași.
Goldfaden came from out of a group called the Broadway. The Broadway were these groups of itinerant musicians who would go from town to town and sing and perform and create songs in places like the Palmaveda and like other places.
When he came to Iași, there were a group of singers, of ministrants, itinerant singers, who sang in cellars, wine cellars. Iași had marvelous wine cellars at the time, and they sang.
O Brüder, gieß da rein a große Fläschel Wein, vom Warmen, vom Süßen soll nicht aufhören gießen. O Brüder, gieß da rein, o Brüder, gieß da rein a große Fläschel Wein. Vom Warmen, vom Süßen soll nicht aufhören gießen, o Brüder, gieß da rein.
When Goldfaden himself tried to perform in Romania, in one of these taverns, he was booed off the stage. People knew his songs because they traveled orally in the culture, but once they saw him, he looked very alien to them. He was completely Europeanized.
He was a hustler, you know. He considered himself an intellectual, and he was. He's a very appealing guy to me. He wanted to, he had these mustaches, you know, and he had a walking stick. He was a dandy. He had a boutonniere, you know. He wanted a dashing place in the community.
They didn't know what was going on. He was declaiming poetry in this very rigid, earnest way. They wanted comedy and they wanted song.
Romanian audiences were very easy audiences because they liked, this is Goldfaden's phrase, they liked a kiss and a song and a slap and a dance. They liked a little playlet and they liked a good time.
Prima oară când el a ajuns la Iași, atunci s-a căutat o cărciumă. Și a intrat aici în cărciumă, se chema Pomul Verde. Și a trebuit să bea un vin, el era ca un fel de trubadur, plecat din țară și a ajuns acolo. Și pe scenă erau trei actori care cântau un cântec scris de el, dintr-una din piesele. El a auzit piesa, au terminat ăștia cântecul, s-a dus ei și a întrebat, voi știți cine a scris acest cântec? A spus, sigur, cum ei au vrut să facă, că știu, Goldfaden. Zice, da, și unde e? Zice, a murit de mult. Și atunci a spus, nu, domnule, eu sunt Goldfaden. Ăia trei au leșinat pe loc, așa. Și ăștia trei, și cu el al patrulea, ăsta se spune că ăsta a fost primul lucreu al teatrului idiș. De aici a început, printre ăștia trei actori și el, împreună au început să joace teatrul idiș.
Due to the fact that I am in Iași at the moment, at the general request I've decided to put together a troupe with the very best artists, which I intend to organize in an European manner in order for it to become a serious institution. Here in Iași will soon be set up a permanent Jewish theatre that I was asked to manage. At the same time, I will continue writing new plays for this theatre that will be unique in the world. This is why I hope that when you receive this letter, you won't think long and you will get here right away. Next to me, you will be here warmer than anywhere else. We have performed in Simon Mark's garden. The tickets were sold starting at 3 marks and 50 cents. There were never so many spectators since the beginning of the garden.
Goldfaden was not completely stranger to this phenomenon of theater. He saw theater before, he saw theater in Russia, and he also wrote songs.
One song that I wanted to sing for you is the song that Goldfaden sang in the early wine cellars when he was discovered for the first time. And this is a song that he says, "I thank you, dear God, for all of your wonders. You've made weddings for all my children. Thank God all my children are religious." Then he says, and it starts like this. I dank dir Gott in liebherzige Getreie für alle deine Winde. Ich hab Chassene gehabt mit meinem Weib, alle meine Kinder. Oi, mein Weib, tanz mit mir, die dem Eidem nicht der Schnee. Alle weißen mit ihm, als meine Kinder sind fremd. Alle weißen mit ihm, als meine Kinder sind fremd. Ja, bam, bam, ei Gewalt, ja, bam, bam, Tate Süße. Alle weißen mit ihm, als meine Kinder sind fremd. Alle weißen mit ihm, als meine Kinder sind fremd. Alle weißen mit ihm, everyone knows everywhere, als meine Kinder sind fremd, that my children are religious. This was a takeoff. This was poking fun at the religious.
It shows you how the Maskilic writers like Goldfaden wrote critically of the Hasidim with a lot of irony and parody, and the folk didn't get it. And they performed the songs, but as straight, as praising the Hasidic rabbi. So when I record people singing Alle Wesen imidim as meine Kinder sind fremd, that my children are Orthodox or traditional, they sing it as a happy praising song for the traditional ways, whereas Goldfaden meant just the opposite. But you have to think, when Goldfaden performed it the first time, they must have they made fun of them, the way they were dressed, But if you didn't see the performance and you just heard the words, the folk process, you keep singing it, the meaning of the performance changes.
He wrote one-act farces. He pulled some songs into them. He graduated to two-act plays. He explained certain rules of dramaturgy to his actors, kept on prodding them along, tried to make the plays more sophisticated, but very, very slowly. The costumes more sophisticated. And of course the backgrounds, the backdrops, and the use of props. He started from ground zero, really, and he worked his actors up.
All of a sudden, people were able to go to see a Yiddish play, and so people just like themselves who had the same problems and really were able to express them in a language that they understood.
El a dus oameni săraci pe scenă, el a dus bogați pe scenă, el a dus oameni care erau religioși și nereligioși, contrareligioși. El a trăit, ceea ce a scris din viața lui. Ce e mai bun poate să fie pe scenă și să aduce o viață a omului. Și poporul nostru, Baruch Hashem, mult am suferit și mult că așa am și trăit foarte bine în timpurile alea.
One of Goldfaden's first major hits was a play he called Shmendrik. It was so popular that Shmendrik became really a Yiddish word, denoting someone who is an idiot, a hapless idiot. And if you call someone a Shmendrik, or if you're called a Shmendrik, that is not a good thing. And this is a name that Goldfaden coined. He adapted this play from a Romanian play that was supposedly very popular at the time, Vlăduțu Mami. This he was introduced to by his actor Sigmund Mogilescu. From Shmendrik, he goes on to write Dikishef Machrin, which is one of his finest plays that he'll ever write.
You have to imagine the birthday party of Mirela. Mirela is our heroine, and she is the daughter of Avramche, and her mother has died, and she's being raised by a stepmother, Basia. And it's the show opens at the birthday party of Mirela, and all the guests are singing Zu dein Geburtstag, to your birthday. We celebrate your birthday, and we're here to celebrate, and we've brought all presents, and we wish you only good health and happiness. Zu dein Geburtstag, zu dein Jomtefreit, haben sie versammelt, alle deine gute Freit. Jeder wünscht dir viel getreue Welt, wir wohl Gottes und Frieden. Privat, wir wünschen dir. Privat, wir wünschen dir Gesund. Privat, wir wünschen dir. Privat, wir wünschen dir Gesund. First Hatzmach comes. Hatzmach is the town peddler, and he comes to cheer the people up, to cheer the children up, and they play a kind of a blind man's bluff in Yiddish, and they sing tra-la-la-la-la-la, tanzen, springen, tra-la-la-la-la-la, springen, singen, tra-la-la-la-la-la, das macht Mut, tra-la-la-la-la-la, tanzen, springen, tra-la-la-la-la-la, gut. And they say, Hatzmach is a Blinde, was ist das für a Winde? Ze läuft ja ich nicht Kinder, und ze sind wir alle da. Jeder läuft a Sindel, ze läuft nicht die Kinder, und sind wir alle da. Tra-la-la-la-la-la, singen, tra-la-la-la-la-la, das macht Mut. Tra-la-la-la-la-la, tanzen, singen, tra-la-la-la-la-la, gut. Meanwhile, at the market is a typical big scene. We see it in later Broadway productions like Oliver and Brigadoon, this kind of market scene that Goldfaden originated in, this scene where everybody's selling things and they say, buy, customers, you won't find anything else. I have the best fish, everything else. Kauf, keinem kommt daher. Noch einmal Kasäunem ist zu kriegen schwer. Läuft und ihr seid nur mit ihnen, essen, trinken, alle Dingen. Kauf, was er gläst, all Gorens ist. Kauf, was er gläst, all Gorens ist. Kauf, keinem kommt daher. Buy, buyers come here. Noch einmal Kasäunem, another market like this you won't find. Kauft euch, ihr seid nur mit ihnen. Buy if you're only a maven. The plural of a maven is a mavinim, is mavinim. A maven is a connoisseur. Essen, trinken von allen Minen, eat and drink from every kind of stuff. Kauf was euch gelist, halb Gottums ist. Suddenly, the Baba Yachna appears, the witch, and she comes to Mirela and she concocts some kind of outlandish story that her mother and Mirela's grandmother were distant cousins. So she says, come back to me and I'll help you. And Mirela says no, and the two of them sing this duet. Kim, zu mir, Kim zu mir, im Stil und sing Kim zu mir, Nein, ich hab Meure, Vater Baba Yachna Meure. Nein, ich hab Meure, was ist denn mir das Hart? Nein, ich hab Meure, Vater Baba Yachna Meure. Kim zu mir, aheim. Kocht das Kessel 3x3, bis es kommt der Aschmedei. Habt der Mensch heraus vom Städtel, warf dem gleich herein in Kessel. Fertig muss es werden.
Vrăjitoarea știți că a fost jucat, scris special Goldfaden pentru un bărbat, că femeile în timpul în urmă cu ani nu au vrut să joace teatru.
fact, one of the milestones of the early Yiddish theater is the introduction of women on the Yiddish stage, which was a very, very big challenge for Goldfaden. And he wrote a play named Die Stumme Kalle, the Silent Bride, or the Mute Bride in English. It was the only way to get a female up on stage. She was so terrified about speaking. And that's the way she finally acclimatized to the stage and to acting in general. And that was the first Yiddish actress. How much of the play that the audience saw, we don't really know, because the actors were so loose in interpreting it on the stage. We know that already by 1877, the actors have grown much more sophisticated. Some of them are celebrities at this point.
Goldfaden came from a very Western European tradition in that respect, where he thought he was the top. But the Yiddish tradition, a lot of the Yiddish actors were coming from a different perspective, where it was the actor, or they were the ones that the audience loved, not Gold. They didn't know who Goldfaden was. They came to see the great actors. And so they wanted more respect. As you know, financially, people used to rip him off. You know, they used to perform his plays without telling him. He got very little money. So there was a real clash between sometimes. And if you read the history of Goldfaden, it's one troupe leaving after another. He kept having to reorganize the plays. His troops.
His plays really peak in Russia when he decides to go off the trail of the comedy and to write historical operettas.
Last time, here we go.
Later on, we went and tried another place like Shulamis, Bar Kokhba, to awaken in the Jewish people a sense of pride, a sense of values in their own past, in their own history.
He's still working hard at writing in 1883 when the authorities decide that the Yiddish theater should be shut down.
In this town, they weren't allowed to perform, and in that town, you couldn't perform in Yiddish. And then in this town, you needed a permit. In St. Petersburg, you couldn't perform without a special permit. And people were always packing up and moving on.
Following the anti-Jewish legislation in Russia and the impossibility to continue a normal social and cultural life there, many Jews decided to leave Russia, so that with the year 1883, a wave of immigration from Russia began. Up to 1914, almost 2 million of Russian and East European Jews immigrate to America. Here, after the hard times of the beginning of the immigration, they accommodated to the new life.
When they came to America, just expressed their love for America, and they talked about the new hero. And in this case, it was Columbus, and it went like this. This is by Perlmutter and Vol. A Städtel is Amerika, am mechayich leben. Es ruht auf ihr die Schrinele, wir sollen also leben. Wir haben es bixen Menschenblut, darf mir auf Zores. A Gubernator darf mir nicht, a Kaiser auf Kapores. Eis ist geht, singt Schale mit, is Leben soll Columbus. Trink Briederlach Lachayim, Leben soll Columbus, fahr dem Land dem Nahem. Seid zufrieden, gläub nicht in die Trombes. Schreibt Jeden, Leben soll Columbus, Leben soll Columbus. in America, we did a version of this, and we did a English and Yiddish version. So it went something like this. A shtetl is America, except a little bigger. To leave a place wonderful, you'd have to be Michigan. We got no czar and no pogroms, thanks God for every day here. How lucky for the Yidden that Columbus found his way here. Ice is git, zinchalimit.
The actors leave. They go to America, and America will become, of course, the major center of Yiddish theater after this point. Goldfaden misses the boat on this one. He thinks his instincts tell him to stay in Russia, and it's probably a bad move. By the time he gets to America, it's 1888, and the Yiddish theater has time to develop a great deal. It's as if forgotten Goldfaden.
Companies like Tomaszewski's company, like Adler's company, they were very successful, and they forgot their father. Goldfaden was walking the streets of Lower East Side and looked around. The theaters were full with people, and he looked as a father who was abandoned by his children.
By 1888, Jacob Gordon has emerged on the scene, and he becomes really the king of the Yiddish theater at that point. And of course, when the critics praise Gordon, they denigrate Goldfaden. They compare him to Goldfaden favorably, and Goldfaden is really humiliated.
The theater exploded, and not long after the beginning, 1876, by the 1900s, the Second Avenue was full with Yiddish theaters.
His audience and critics grow more sympathetic to him. They see him as the theater's founder, as someone important, someone they don't need to rebel against, I guess, someone who they can accept. And tributes are made to him in the theater. Some of his plays are revived to show him honor.
On January 9th, 1908, the whole traffic in Lower East Side in Manhattan came to a halt. The next day, the New York Times reported, a burial which attracted more than 75,000 people stopped the traffic and filled the streets, so that 215 policemen were unable to keep order, was a very special event, even for a city like New York. Was the deceased person an important banker who committed suicide or a big boss? Not at all. The man was a simple poet and a playwright. His name was Avram Goldfaden, the Jewish Shakespeare, and the father of the Yiddish theater.
Goldfaden opened the stage for Gordin, for Pinsky, for Peretz. Shalom Aleichem started writing plays. He paved the way for the genius of dramatic writing, for people like Levi. Plays like the Dybbuk may not have seen the lights of the stage if there was not a Goldfaden who opened the stage for this kind of dramatic expression.
They talked in America about when the big Romanian influx came, about what an upsurge there was in popular theater as opposed to art theater. All of a sudden, everybody loved a musical.
When Goldfaden immigrated to the United States in the late 1870s, I think, and he goes to New York City and he creates Yiddish theater, and the capital of Yiddish theater in America was New York City, 2nd Avenue, which is still there today, the street 2nd Avenue, and the original theater is still there, but now it's a movie theater. He again needed Jewish musicians, and the Klezmer, great, we have another opportunity for work. And so he worked together with the Jewish musicians, and music helps tell a story, first of all. It's sad, you can make it sadder on the violin, the clarinet, happy, funny, and also the folk songs he incorporated, because the people that immigrated, why did they come to see some of this theater? It wasn't that they wanted to sometimes hear new theater, they wanted to remember the old. I am longing, ich benken, I long for Iași, or Dorohoi, or Botashan. I have family there, or my memories, my childhood. So the songs and the theater were way that Goldfaden was clever. He could make theater for them. So for that moment, that once a week, they could pretend they were back in Romania in their old childhood. And the music and the play helped create the whole package.
The sound oi, which was in the word doina, was picked up by immigrants and also the foreigners. When they came to America, let's say the name Moshe quickly became Moshe, Shloime, Shloma, or in modern Israel in any case. But also people understood that the oi sound is the essence of Yiddish.
This is a song of an old Yiddish folk song called Ota Zoi Neta Schneider. This is how a tailor sews. And the old Yiddish song is Ota Zoi Neta Schneider, Ota Zoi Neta Doch. This is how a tailor sews. And Neta Neta ganze Woche. He sews and sews a whole week. Verdient a gilden mit a loch, and he makes a dollar with a hole in it. We would call it in America, English, we'd say a wooden nickel. He sews and sews all week, but he makes nothing. And ganze Woche verdient a gilden mit a loch. Well, the interesting thing is, Cab Calloway, the great black American songwriter and performer, grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Harlem. Right? Harlem was Jewish at the time. And he heard these Yiddish songs. So he came up, this great jazz pianist came up with this version. My mama used to sing to me a plaintive little melody. And where that melody came from, I swear I'll never know. But now that I'm a citizen, the tune comes back to me again. And as I sing my story, just listen how it goes. Otazé, says the tailor, as he fashions pretty clothes. Otazé, says the tailor, as he sews and sews and sews. He's as busy as can be, making lovely finery, things my baby loves to wear when I take her to the fair. Otazé, says the tailor, as he fashions pretty clothes. Otazé, says the tailor, as he sews and sews and sews.
What I find interesting is how the folk changed Goldfaden's songs. Even the most famous song, Rožinkis mit Mandlin, if you read all the words that Goldfaden wrote, it's a very long song, and it's really very critical of the Jewish way of doing things. He wanted them to change things. But the way that the folk sang the song was really just as a lullaby, and they got rid of all of his words, the critical words. It's not the only time. Time and again, when you look at Goldfaden's original words, and the way that the folk sang them as folk songs, they became folk songs.
Rožinkis mit Mandlin, Schlaf sheyidale schlaf, Es wird kommen a Zeit von Eisenbahnen, sie werden vertreten auf die Welt. Eisene Wegen wirst die euch spannen, und wirst in dem euch verdienen viel Geld. Ai, lu, lu, lu. Und als du wirst werden reich, Jidale, sollst du sich der Mannen in dein Liederle. Rosenkäs mit Mandeln, das wird sein dein Beruf. Rosenkäs mit Mandeln. Schlaf Jidale, schlaf Jidale, schlaf Jidale, schlaf. I
And you study it, you see that there are influences all over the place. He borrowed. He wasn't a musician. He wasn't a composer, but he was a multi-talented individual. He wrote, he sung, he designed the sets, he directed. But he was a worldly person. So he heard the music, he heard operas, he heard oratorios. In one moment, in one area in Bar Kokhba, one of his other operettas, he has a moment that's definitely comes from Handel's Messiah, but it's in Yiddish. Und mir alle werden sein frei, und wir werden, which is hallelujah, hallelujah, from the Handel. So he took from, he would hear it and he adapted it into his melodies.
It's also true that the musical comedy, which is we consider so American, was forming right around the time that Goldfaden came. Goldfaden didn't bring the first musicals.
Certainly there's a Jewish tradition among comedy in America that you see. That comes from the Yiddish theater as well. A lot of, especially in the early days of physical theater, there was an actor here, Mogulescu, who was from Romania and then came to America. He was famous for being dancing and singing, and he wrote a lot of wonderful songs too. That kind of physical comedy.
קודם כל, מבחינת השחקן, זה גמישות, זה יכולת תנועה, זה יכולת שירה, וזה בכלל יכולת שירה, זמרה ודיבור ברמה קצת יותר גבוהה מתיאטרון רפרטוארי רגיל, מאחר וישנם הרבה מחזות והצגות, וגם הביקוש של הקהל הוא להצגות שיש בהם גם שירה וגם ריקוד, וגם הגשת טקסט מאוד קצבית ומאוד פלסטית ומאוד לא רגילה, אז זה קודם כל מה שדורש התיאטרון היידי. זאת אומרת, מראש כשאתה בא לשחק בתיאטרון היידי, אתה צריך לדעת לשיר, לרקוד ולנוע. זה קודם כל.
כן, ואני גם חושב שהמשחק בשפה היידית, עם הצלילים של המוזיקה של השפה, זה עוד אלמנט שנותן ייחודיות נורא גדולה לשפה היידית. כל מיני מילים, צקווצ'ן, גטרינקן, המוזיקליות של השפה, רק המוזיקליות הזאת נותנת המון חיים והמון חיוניות למשחק.
In any language you think differently. I mean, English makes you think in a certain way, Hebrew, Romanian, but there's something about thinking in Yiddish that it's mischievous. It's a mischievous language and a poetic language and a language of diminutives. It's filled with, I do this, a chair is a benkel, but a little chair is a benkale. A shoe is a shiach, but a little shoe, and not even a little shoe, just the shoe of someone who you love. They have shiachalach, and a foot is a feast, but if it's a foot that you love, it's a fisale, and it's so lovely.
How the Yiddish theater music influenced a little bit of America, you know. So we sing this melody, yabba bye bye, yabba baba bye bye, yabba bye, yabba bye bye. Yabba bye bye, yabba baba bye bye. An old melody, yabba bye, sounds like a Yiddish melody. And then the next part is, I bye bye yai bye 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 yai bye 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 yai bye 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 yai bye 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 bye. It sounds like a Yiddish melody. Of course we know it's George Gershwin. Yabba bye bye bye, yabba bye bye bye. So we know that Gershwin went to the Yiddish theater. He talks about it. He talks that he talked to Molly Pickin in his memoirs that he went to the Yiddish theater, and he believes that this one song that he wrote comes from him remembering his mother singing this song from the Yiddish theater. It went like this: Schlaf mein Fegele, mach zu die Eigelach, schlaf mein Taie Kind. Schlaf mein Fegele, mach zu die Eigelach, schlaf mein Taie Kind. Well, in Gershwin's hands it became this: my one and only, what are you gonna do if you turn me down? I am so crazy over you. My one and only, what are you gonna do if you turn me down? I am so crazy over you. So you have little examples of how composers like Gershwin heard music from the Yiddish theater.
The richness of American musical theater was developed in the Yiddish theater. That the Yiddish theater came first, and the artists in the American musical theater, the initial artists were mostly Jews, and Irving Berlin and all of these other artists, and Gershwin, whose history was Russian Kismet Mandlin, who went to the Yiddish theater, and the Yiddish theater started with Goldfaden. So I would say that he received not any credit for it, but it is on his back that we sit today, I think.
It's a very interesting thing that the Yiddish theater had such an outburst, like a torch, like a flame, and it burned with such intensity that from this intensity it burned out. Not only because of that. Of course, the decline and ultimately the demise of the Yiddish theater had several reasons. One of the main reasons is that the millions of the Yiddish-speaking population in Europe was annihilated. In the 4 years of the Second World War, there was no more Jewish audience to come to America or to populate the Yiddish stages.
So people assimilated and they learned English and they did all right for themselves and they went to Broadway, or they moved a little bit out from the neighborhoods where the theaters were, and it wasn't convenient to come in.
The Yiddish theater turned into the English-speaking theater. Writers like Neil Simon, Arthur Miller, who were extremely successful in English. Great-grandfathers were people who went to Yiddish.
So it's a miracle there was any Yiddish theater at all. I don't know whether it's a testimony to the Jews or it's a testimony to theater. It's a metaphor. It's a testimony to humanness that there was any Yiddish theater at all.
In terms of the Yiddish theater, and in terms, there's a story that Isaac Bashevis Singer used to tell when they would ask if the Yiddish theater is dead, and he would say, no, they're not dead, but a Dybbuk entered them, and they transformed and became Hollywood. If Hollywood was as good as the Yiddish theater, I think that would be pretty great.
I wouldn't claim that actors from Yiddish theater were very influential. Very few people that acted in Yiddish theater actually acted in Hollywood or on Broadway.
The Yiddish sensibility, the Yiddish ability to speak happiness and sadness all at the same time, to reflect a depth, is certainly has certainly been used by Hollywood, and it's certainly been something that artists have tried to draw from their own work, to try to create that as well. It's easy to do in Yiddish. I mean, in English it's harder. It's harder to be in the light and in the darkness. And in Yiddish, you can live in the well of sadness and have a smile on your face somehow at the same time.
אז מה שאני מרגיש פה זה, והתיאטרון שלנו בכלל, יש לו עניין של שליחות בכל העולם. כל מקום שאנחנו מגיעים, אנחנו בדרך כלל מגיעים למקום שאנשים שם צמאים ליידיש, צמאים לחזרה הזאת. אז גם פה, כמו בליטא, כמו בשאר המדינות שאנחנו נוסעים, יש לנו שליחות, כמו שעמיתי אמר, להחזיר את השפה הזאת, להגיד מה שנקרא עם ישראל חי, מה שאנחנו אומרים, שאנחנו חיים, שהשפה הזאת חיה, שאנחנו באים גם למקום הזה שהיו פה המון יהודים ופתאום הם נעלמו. אני, כפי שהבנתי בעיר הזאת, יאס או יאש, היו המון יהודים פעם ועכשיו אין כמעט אף אחד, והנה אנחנו חזרנו, והנה אנחנו מדברים את השפה הזאת, והנה אנחנו מחזירים את התרבות הזאת.